Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and another video where today I'm challenging myself to complete an A4 size watercolour painting of a cat in just 1 hour. Now this may not sound like too much of a challenge, but on average I spend anything from 2 to 4 hours plus on each of my animal paintings. So I thought it would be interesting to see what the effects of having to speed up have on the techniques I use and the resulting painting. And I'll tell you just how I came up with the idea for this challenge as well as what conclusions I've come to later on in the video. So I hope you enjoy it. All the materials I'm using will be listed in the description box, along with a reference photo from Pixabay if you want to go and check them out, and maybe even try this exercise out for yourself. I've set my alarm clock for 1 hour and I'm going to keep it in view throughout the video so you can see how long I spend on each part of the painting. I'll also put the reference photo on screen at intervals too. I thought I'd use the wet in wet technique a lot for this painting, as it's a good way to cover a lot of the paper fairly quickly and can give a looser, more expressive feel to your watercolour paintings. Loosening up in my watercolour paintings is also something I've been wanting to practice, so today is the perfect opportunity for me to try that out. I also decided to use a bigger brush than I would normally use, so I could cover more ground more quickly, so this is a size 12 round brush. With a lot of my animal paintings, I like to paint the eyes first, but I was a bit worried that I'd spend too much time on them if I did that today, so I decided to go straight in and paint the fur first. So I pre-wet the paper before dropping in some Payne's Grey. I avoided wetting the area of paper I wanted to keep white, so I could keep better control of the flow of paint and preserve some of the white of the paper for the really bright fur areas. I began on the right side of the face and worked downwards, painting around the darkest part of the right eye. This was to try and get a good range of values in from the beginning, which I thought would help me better judge the rest of the values throughout the piece and ensure my painting had enough contrast. Normally I would apply my watercolour paint in layers, starting with the lighter layers and gradually build up to the dark values. But with time not on my side today, I really had to try and remember to go in a lot darker right from the start. It was a bit scary, but I always had the option to lift out some colour with a thirsty brush or a paper towel if I needed to change up or lighten anything. To save time, I also mixed the colours on the damp paper rather than pre-mix the paint on the palette. So here I'm adding in some indigo and a bit of sepia. And I really like mixing colours on the paper like this, as it creates some really nice colour transitions without any harsh stop and start points. Next I move on to the right ear and again pre-wet the paper before adding more Payne's Grey. I thought the ears might be a bit tricky to paint quickly and accurately, as there is a lot of white fur as well as some light fleshy colouring here, which is probably why I didn't paint them first. But without too much time to deliberate, I tried to simplify what I saw in the reference photo and concentrate on getting the right values, rather than paint around individual hairs as I might normally do. It's a bit out of my comfort zone, but is definitely encouraging a looser style. From the ear, I go back over some of the fur on this side of the face to add more colour and build in the suggestion of the length and direction of fur growth here too. But I also wanted to keep the outside edges of the painting soft, so used a clean damp brush along the paint edges to achieve that. So nearly a quarter of the way in, and I feel like so far it's going okay, but with the tendency of watercolour to dry lighter, I was a bit concerned that I wouldn't have time to go back and add further layers to darken up some of these areas later, and I also didn't have time to just wait for them to dry so I could render it as I went along. So there was quite a bit of moving around across the piece and a fair bit of guesswork that was involved in balancing the method and techniques I chose with the natural properties of watercolour as a medium. Even though I felt like I was going in with more concentrated paint than I perhaps would with my normal layering technique, I still think I could have gone darker, but it was quite hard to judge how the values of the wet paint would dry and get a variety of values in the fur with just one pass. That said, I did re-wet the paper here as it had dried enough that I could do this and go in a bit stronger with more Payne's Grey. If it hadn't been dry enough though, I could have ended up with watercolour blooms, which I didn't want. Anyway, luckily this time that didn't happen. Next, I moved on to paint the left side of the face, only this time for the darker shadow areas like underneath the cat, I first applied more concentrated paint to dry paper. This meant the colour didn't get diluted like it did when I applied it to the wet paper on the other side, and would hopefully dry darker as a result. So I ended up using more of a combination of wet on dry and wet on wet techniques on this side of the face, which I think worked out better, and I wish I'd done this on the right side now, but finding more efficient ways to work was one of my main goals during this challenge, so I've learnt that for next time. Okay, so at the beginning of the video I said I'd tell you what gave me the idea for this painting challenge, and whilst I'm finishing up on this side of the cat's face I'll tell you. So it started when my daughter came home from school last week, having been told by her GCSE art teacher that although she is very good at art, she's quite slow and meticulous and basically just needs to speed up, or else she won't get the grade she deserves. Easier said than done of course, but it got me thinking, what would happen if I had less time to complete my paintings, and how would it affect my art? And is there any advice I could give to my daughter that might help? So that's when I came up with the idea for this video. Now you may be thinking you can't rush art, and to be honest I'm inclined to agree, but equally there is also the chance that by spending too much time on a piece of artwork you can overwork and maybe even spoil it. And what if you have to rush a piece, say for a deadline? So I was thinking that by putting this time restriction on my painting today, I'll be forced to simplify the painting process and hopefully end up with something a bit more spontaneous and interesting, without compromising too much on the overall impact and standard of the finished piece. And through doing this speed paint video, I hoped I might be able to come up with a few tips or suggestions for anyone else out there who also has a limited amount of time to fit their creativity into. So far I've used a bigger brush and tried a mixture of techniques to try and save time, but you could also try a smaller piece of paper, a slightly looser style, or perhaps even a different medium. Perhaps painting with opaque gouache instead of watercolour today might have given me a more opaque covering with just one layer, for example. Working with a limited colour palette can also help to simplify the process. I do think it's really hard though, as I don't think you should be forced to change up all of these things just to fit into a schedule. Ideally, you should be free to express yourself however you want to, but everything is against the clock these days, so I guess sometimes we have to make compromises in order to get done what we need to. But what do you think about this? Can you rush art? Yes, but should you rush art? What's your thoughts? There are so many different viewpoints on this, and I would love to hear your opinions. Also, if you have any suggestions for how to be more efficient while still being true to yourself and your own personal art style, then please share it below and maybe we can chat about it some more. For now though, let's get back to the painting. With the left side of the face painted, I've gone back to try and add a bit more depth to the shadow areas on the right side of the face, but with only half an hour left, I need to get started on the eyes, nose and mouth. Looking back at the reference photo, the detail I can see in the eyes is amazing, but I knew I wouldn't be able to spend too long on them with this challenge, so I had to think how I could convey the bright, sharp details quickly. Normally, as I said, I would work in layers and gradually build them up until I was happy with the hues and level of contrast, but I figured I'd need to change up my technique today as the clock was ticking. I went in with an olive green first and applied it much more concentrated than I would normally do, and lifted out the highlights using a clean damp brush. I did the same on both eyes and added in some sap green to the brighter centre parts of the eye, still being careful to leave any highlights a lot lighter. Whilst the paper was still wet, I also went in with some sepia to the darker outside edge of the eyes and let it bleed into the green for a more natural look. Trying to control the amount of water and paint and how much the colours bled together whilst working on both eyes at the same time was a bit of a balancing act, and both eyes are quite different in terms of the amount of light and shadow on them. The left eye is a lighter green where the light is coming in from the left, and the right eye, more in shadow, is a lot darker, so I had to keep that in mind as I was painting. When it came to painting the dark pupils of the eyes, I did hit a bit of a problem, especially with the eye on the left hand side, as the paper wasn't really dry enough. But I used a paper towel to lift it out, and whilst it was drying, painted in the cat's pink nose and the pinky areas of each ear. I did this quite quickly and loosely, and it was at this point that I decided I'd need to add in the white fluffy fur here on top once this area had dried, perhaps with some opaque white gouache or ink. But with only 15 to 20 minutes to go before my time was up, I needed to get a wriggle on. So whilst the ears were drying, I finished off the nose and mouth. And went back to finish the pupil in the left eye. I also switched up to a smaller brush to add definition to the outside edges of the eyes to really make them stand out. With only 10 minutes to go, I did decide to quickly add in some darker hairs with this same detail brush, but I also wanted to add some white hair and whiskers in too, so at this point I was definitely feeling the pressure a bit and rushing to get it all to a point where I could happily call it finished. Not quite the relaxing, calming feeling I usually have when painting with watercolours. Overall though, I did enjoy it, and at the end of the day this is not a piece of coursework or a commission, so the end result is not going to get me a bad grade or anything. The goal was to see what techniques I could use to speed up the process and what the results of this were on the quality and finish of the final piece. I think it was a very interesting exercise, and I think it forced me to simplify the painting in a way that I wouldn't normally have done. I did also end up with a looser painting that I do quite like, but I can't help but think that it still looks unfinished, and having to speed up meant that I had to compromise on the level of detail I could add, which is kind of my style. However, I do sometimes wonder whether the extra amount of time I spend adding in extra details is completely necessary, since any painting is usually viewed from a distance to fully be appreciated anyway. Creating a good piece of artwork that conveys feeling and emotion is also not just about having it technically perfect, and sometimes it's those little imperfections that add interest and personality to your work. So I think it's good to go out of your comfort zone and experiment, and there are things I do like about this painting. I like the luminous quality you get with watercolours by not adding multiple layers, and the looser feel to it, and I'm pleased with how the eyes turned out. I was also glad I left a few minutes to add in the whiskers and a few highlights with the white ink. If I had more time though, I would have darkened up the fur on the right hand side of the face and pinked up the nose a bit. Overall though, I think speed and accuracy come with time, a lot of practice and confidence, and how long your painting takes depends on a variety of different factors. At the end of the day though, whatever time you have, I think the main thing above everything else is that you should enjoy your art. But that's all for today guys, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, comment and subscribe, and why not hit the bell icon too so you get notified as soon as I upload a new video. Have a great weekend and I'll see you all in the next one. Bye.